Need your favorite DFS plays at the following positions for tonight's huge 13-game NBA slate. So let's start with who you're going to build around at center, Garion.
It's hard not to just go right back to Joel Embiid. He was so dominant against the Hornets in their game on Monday. And while you can definitely put part of the blame at the Hornets' health and safety protocols outbreak, the fact they're missing so many guys, specifically their Plumlee brother, they just don't really have all that much depth at the center position. They don't have that much size, and that's hurt them throughout the season as a whole, even when they haven't been shorthanded. They've given up the third most DraftKings points per game to opposing centers so far this season. I don't know if Embiid's going to score 75 DraftKings points again. That was overtime assisted. Maybe this script gets a little more out of hand the second time the Hornets have to play this shorthanded, but again, I just think Embiid is such a safe 50, 55-point floor, and he's obviously got that massive ceiling too.
All right, Nick, Joel Embiid's going to cost $11,700. Who are you going with at center?
It's got to be Joel Embiid tonight. And look, a lot of the stats that Garion's pulling up are the ones that I want to use for today, so I'm just going to echo more of what he said. But the biggest thing is that this isn't going to be too chalky of a play as much as the Hornets are terrible against opposing centers this season, because just at center alone, you have Giannis in a favorable matchup with Bam Adebayo. You have Nikola Jokic, who's obviously a reliable guy you can go with. Karl Anthony Towns going tonight, Domantas Sabonis, Julius Randle, Nikola Vucevic. Like, you have a ton of options at high value guys. And then there's also like Jared Allen. I know he's in a tough spot going up against Vucevic, but you have a lot of options here tonight. So this isn't going to be too chalky of a play, as much as we're both in agreement on this one. I still think this is the guy you got to go to tonight, but it's just you're not going to be part of the crowd necessarily. Not guaranteed as you might be on other nights.
Nick, what about a forward you would build your lineup around? There are three that'll cost you north of $11,000.
Yeah, I'm not going to go with any one of those guys. If I'm going to pay up for Joel Embiid, I got to find a way to get a little bit of savings elsewhere. And this guy's not necessarily a value play, but I think he could, he's going to at least cover his salary tonight, and that's Evan Mobley. I know I just talked about Jared Allen as a legitimate option at center tonight, but he does have a tough matchup against Nikola Vucevic. And when you're looking at opposing centers, Jared Allen, the Bulls have done well against opposing centers, but when you go to power forward, I know DeMar DeRozan is out, but Derrick Jones Jr. not necessarily an upgrade defensively. And going up against a guy like Evan Mobley, who's got a lot of size, the Bulls are the worst team defensively in terms of DraftKings fantasy points against opposing power forwards this season. So you got a guy like Evan Mobley, who I know up and down a little bit, a rookie and everything, and by and large, I like what we've seen from him this season, but he's definitely in a spot where he can take advantage, especially when Jared Allen's going to have his hands full with Vucevic.
Gary Bear, what's your strategy here at forward?
Well, there's just so many places to save tonight. I mean, the blanket statement is just going to be, we'll have to wait and see on the injury report, but that's going to be true of a lot of cases, and that includes Portland, where we know Lillard's going to be out. We know McCollum's going to be out. We're waiting on some of the secondary scoring contributors, like Anthony Simons is questionable. You've got Nasir Little's questionable to come back after his 3-game absence. But however this all shakes out, I just think Norman Powell's too cheap. He's $4,800. For whatever reason, after playing almost 44 minutes and hoisting up 24 shots on Monday out of just sheer necessity, his salary dropped. He's under $5K for the first time in a full month. The last time he was less than $5,000, November 6th. So I just don't see how you can ignore Powell on a slate like this. I guess the argument against him would be they're playing the Warriors. They're probably going to get blown out. This game could be non-competitive halfway through the third quarter, and that would obviously impact Powell's overall volume. But at the same time, if he's going to be operating at a 32 to 35% usage rate, which he likely will be without Lillard and McCollum in the lineup, it's just hard to ignore a guy like this at $4,800.
All right, Gary, and which guard has that building block potential?
So let's go back to that Philly-Charlotte game, which I think a lot of people are going to be mining for mid-tier value in particular, because the Hornets, out of necessity, again, essentially ran an 8-man rotation against Philadelphia on Monday. And yeah, that game went to overtime, so it impacted some of the starters' numbers a little bit. But you basically had 4 guys playing in excess of 40 minutes, and that's probably what's going to happen again if the Hornets want to keep this game close. You could go with Miles Bridges. You could go with Gordon Hayward. I'm going to go with Kelly Oubre Jr. I think he might be the more popular of the 3 just because he's the cheapest at $7,500. He's coming off that 50 DraftKings point performance against Philadelphia in this last spot. But he was starting to heat up before that game. He scored 30 DraftKings points in 6 straight contests. He's really, really shooting the ball well as of late. And if you look for the season as a whole, he actually leads the Hornets at 1.1 DraftKings points per minute with LaMelo Ball off the court. So if you're looking at 36 to 40 minutes, 1.1 DraftKings points per minute, at that efficiency, he's probably going to score 40 DraftKings points again. And at $7,500, that's paying off value. So I think Oubre is a really, really nice play with a really high floor tonight.
All right, Nick, where are you going at guard? Nope, you're muted.
I am on mute. I apologize. I know that Zach LaVine is going to put up the points tonight with DeMar DeRozan out. Of course, it's a big. He gets a significant increase in usage. He still has the highest usage rate on the team with DeMar DeRozan out. However, I want to save a little bit. I can't go and pay that much for Zach LaVine going up against the Cavs. I like Lonzo Ball at 7.5K tonight. He's had quite a few double rebound performances this month, even with DeRozan in the lineup in those games. And last game, he had a double-double and scored 20 points. He's one of those guys that sees a significant increase in usage with DeRozan off the floor. He is third to Vucevic and LaVine in that sense. But when you have those two guys at the center of the offense, I think Lonzo, he has a chance to double-double on any given night. And then I think his scoring right now, they need offense from somebody else. And so far, he showed in the first game, he can be that guy that does that.
Hey, Gary, when we were talking forwards, I think you mentioned like the amount of value on this slate. So could you actually build around a value play?
You could probably build around like value stacks if you really wanted to. Like the Hornets, you could have a value stack. Portland, you could have a value stack. The Bulls, you could have a value stack. I mean, we've talked a lot about who's missing for Chicago in this game against Cleveland. I mean, this morning we found out that Matt Thomas was going to enter health and safety protocols. And while 2 weeks ago I wouldn't have batted an eye at that news, Matt Thomas had to play 20 minutes in their last game against Denver. Like, that's the point we're at with the Bulls. So when you're talking about someone like Dosunmu, who played 41 minutes, scored 31 DraftKings points, he's $3,900 tonight. Obviously, these guys are going to be tertiary. He and like Derek Jones Jr., who's $4,300. They're going to be tertiary scoring options to Lonzo, to LaVine, to Vucevic, but they're just going to play 35 minutes. At a certain point, you can just lock in guys at 5x, 6x value because of this. So I think Portland and Chicago in particular, you're going to be able to just find a bunch of 3K, 4K guys who fit into lineups who are hitting that 5x value just out of, like osmosis, essentially.
All right, Nick, give me a value play you could build around.
Yeah, I mean, Dennis Smith Jr., we're talking about Portland, right? When I wouldn't have batted an eye at him at 5.8K, but then you see what he's done in the last 2 games where he scored 32 DK fantasy points last time. The game before that, 41.5, and now he's going up against the Warriors, who are 24th against point guards in terms of fantasy production. I mean, to me, that guy's a no-brainer to have in your lineup. Another guy, too, I want to get a little bit of the action in that Brooklyn-Houston game, too. That is the highest total on DraftKings Sportsbook. And he's a little bit cheaper, Eric Gordon at 5.3K. Look, he's not a guy who's necessarily getting a ton more usage, but Kevin Porter Jr., he does become the guy with the second highest usage rate on the team, Kevin Porter Jr. out of the lineup, which he is tonight. And he hasn't been necessarily shooting a ton more. That hasn't where we've seen the increase, but he's been shooting better recently, too. He's coming off back-to-back 20-point performances. So that's the guy. Those are my 2 options tonight in terms of value.
All right, let's wrap up here by switching things over to the DK Sportsbook, getting your favorite bet available tonight. Garion, where are you going?
I'm going to take the under in the Raptors-Thunder game. This is just a battle of 2 underwhelming offenses. It's a low number. It's only 207. But when you look at what the Raptors have done so far in December, they've held opponents to under 100 points in 3 straight games. They've only scored more than 100 points once in their last 5 games. And they are moving at a glacial pace. They are only averaging 91 possessions per 48 minutes so far in the month. That is like 1995 style basketball. You've got a Thunder team that comes into this contest dead last in basketball in 3-point shooting percentage. I just don't know how either of these teams go off for like 115 points and ruin this bet. I think this is a 103-92 final. With either the Thunder or the Raptors winning, honestly, it doesn't matter. It's just not going over this number.
All right, Nick, what's your favorite bet available on the DK Sportsbook tonight?
Right when you go to that NBA tab, the first game that you're going to see listed there is Bulls-Cavs, and you are not going to see the Cleveland Cavaliers as the underdogs tonight. It is the Bulls, surprisingly, 3-point favorites for Cleveland, and I was blown away when I saw this. Look, I get DeRozan is out, but I mean, what do we're not convinced by what the Bulls can do when they played the Nuggets the other night. I understand that Denver, is not at full strength. They're not going to be at full strength, but they're still the 8th seed in the Western Conference. The Cavs are the 8th seed in the Eastern Conference, and record-wise, yeah, Cleveland has a little bit better record, but strength of schedule, obviously, Denver is the favorite there. But when we look at the Cavs and Bulls specifically, the one stat that jumps out to me is the Cavs are 5-7 at home. The Bulls are just as good on the road as they are at home. 9-4 on the road, 8-4 at home. So to me, like seeing the Bulls, the 3-point spread, sure, I can understand that, but seeing the Bulls as underdogs in this one, I got to go with them at plus money.